The chapter began with that quote that captured my attention and introduced what the next 50 pages will essentially be about. It began by describing a place called Manson, Iowa, where a rock weighing 10 billion tons and traveling at 200 times the speed of sound crashed into the city, leaving a crater 3 miles deep and 20 miles across in its landscape. This prompted several scientists to research meteors and craters. Eventually, it was discovered that there was a lot more risk out there in the universe than what anyone had ever imagined. Asteroids, also known as planets that never made it, were subjects of great terror in scientists' eyes. Even after identifying all 26,000 in space, scientists had no idea when any one of them could come hurtling towards us, making a crater like that of Manson, Iowa's. The book used this analogy. Think of the Earth's orbit as a kind of freeway on which we are the only vehicle, but which is crossed regularly by pedestrians who don't know enough to look before stepping off the curb. At least 90% of these pedestrians are quite unknown to us. We don't know where they live, what sort of hours they keep, how often they come our way. All we know is that at some point, at uncertain intervals, they trundle across the road down which we are cruising at 66,000 miles an hour. After more research about asteroids, some scientists began to believe that the reason dinosaurs became extinct was an abrupt incident like an asteroid hitting the Earth. Scientists investigated crater sites, including Manson, Iowa's, but they found out each crater was too early to cause the extinction. A few years later, an unexplained ring formation, 120 miles wide and 30 miles deep, called the Chicxulub crater, was widely accepted as the impact site of an asteroid that caused the dinosaurs and half of the world's species to vanish. The book then explains what exactly happens when an asteroid hits the Earth. It states that the first sign of catastrophe would be a flash of blinding light, followed by a rolling wall of darkness reaching high into the heavens and ending with complete oblivion. Everything in the meteor's path, people, houses, factories, and cars, would crinkle and vanish like cellophane in a flame. Earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanoes would follow and cause even more devastation. The worst part of it all is that even if we knew one of these comets was heading our way, which is extremely hard to find out, it would be much too late to prepare. The next section focuses on earthquakes. It starts by discussing the discovery of what the Earth's interior is made of. A vague description is that there are 4 layers: a rocky outer crust, a mantle of hot, viscous rock, a liquid outer core, and a solid inner core. These layers account for many earthquakes. There are 2 different causes of earthquakes. The first is when 2 plates meet. Tokyo's earthquake in 1923 is an example of this kind. 200,000 people were killed and it cost over $7 million. The other type is known as interplate quakes. They happen away from plate boundaries, so they are highly unpredictable. An example of this kind is shown in New Madrid, Missouri in 1811-1812, where people described land rolling up in waves up to 3 feet high and opening up in holes several feet deep. Cities over 400 miles away were affected. Next, it talks about volcanoes. It gives the example of St. Helens eruption in 1980. It exploded with the force of 500 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs, sending out a murderous hot cloud at 650 miles per hour, killing people 18 miles away. Some volcanoes don't involve mountain building, and rather burst open in a single rupture, powerful enough to leave behind an enormous subsidized pit called a caldera. All 2.2 million acres of Yellowstone National Park is caldera. The volcanic explosion left a crater over 40 miles across. Yellowstone itself is a supervolcano that sits on a hotspot, somewhat like a huge pile of TNT the size of Rhode Island and 8 miles in depth. Yellowstone is an active volcano. Its eruptions average once every 600,000 years. The last one was 630,000 years ago. So as it turns out, Yellowstone is due for an eruption. There are signs of when an eruption may happen, such as changing of geyser explosion patterns or earthquakes, but the problem with Yellowstone is that the whole park is so volatile that it's essentially impossible to draw any conclusions. The chapter ends with this quote about Yellowstone. But the thing is, most of the time bad things don't happen. Rocks don't fall, earthquakes don't occur, new vents don't suddenly open up. For all the instability, it's mostly remarkably and amazingly tranquil, just like Earth itself. I chose this section because I thought it was very interesting and I learned a lot of new things about just how dangerous our world is. I had no idea that every day there is a chance that a giant asteroid will come crashing into Earth and that many places are at a high risk of huge earthquakes or volcanic explosions. It changed my perception of the world and made me recognize just how insignificant we all are in our large, unpredictable universe.